yourself why you're doing this at like a very deep level. So like it's one thing to say like I want to look better, but like why do you want to look better?
Yeah.
Is it because you want to show up differently for your family? Is it because you want to feel different around people at work or like in your job? So get really root down into like why you're doing this, or like longevity or quality of life.
Okay, everybody, welcome to Your Body's Way. I am delighted to bring onto the show Dr. Eni Kadar. Welcome. Thank you for coming on the show. How are you doing?
Thank you so much for having me. I'm doing great. I'm so excited to talk to you today.
Great. Yeah, me too. So I just wanted to explain to everyone first how this conversation came about. So I'm very honest with my podcast community about how I've taken about a year to come round to starting a podcast. And it wasn't until a dear friend of mine, Charlotte, which we share in common, you did a podcast with her and she introduced you to me. And I was just like, I don't know. She introduced some other people as well. But I was like, I don't know. I'm still not sure whether to do a podcast. But when I looked at your social media and I looked at your vibe and your website, you're so lighthearted, and you put your information across in a really lighthearted kind of fun way. You kind of make fun of yourself. And I thought, you know what, if this is what podcasting is about, like getting to know really cool people who are fun, lighthearted, but have a serious message as well, then I'm down for it. So that's the background story. Yeah. So I am really interested to get into the topic today of female weight loss, which is basically what you're focusing on. It's basically what you're all about. And obviously, whole body wellness and holistic health. So I am really interested to know how everything came about. So you are a holistic coach. So first of all, just for everybody, how would you describe holistic? What is holistic?
Holistic, I would describe that as in general terms, like a whole person view of whatever we're looking at, or like a whole big picture view. So with what I do with fitness and health and weight loss, the holistic perspective is more than just food and more than just fitness. It's incorporating things like mindset and sleep and habits and environment and past traumas and spirituality. So it's like looking at somebody's health picture, whether that is what they're struggling with or where they're at or where they want to go, and looking at it them from an individual lens, and then addressing them as a person, because that's what they are. They're not just a sum of their parts.
Right.
And so that's the holistic perspective.
Right. And it's such a good point, because there's so many times we're told, oh, go on this diet, start this fitness regime, do this, do that. And it's almost like they're treated as different compartments. But actually, we are dealing with a person who has not just, food to eat and movement to do, but they have, emotions, they have feelings, they have, spirituality, if that's the way they're inclined. So it's really great to kind of encompass the whole person, and then you have a much better chance of getting success with that person. So I wanted to get into how you started in this business, like how you got into holistic health, because I know you have a really interesting journey, and actually we have a very similar journey, which I'll kind of say towards, like, I'll let you know when you're done, but we have a very similar journey. So I want to know what you've been through and how you came to do what you're doing.
Yeah, for sure. I will, if I'll give you the medium length story.
Okay.
We'll start from when my health and fitness industry experience started. We could really unpack this, but I'll start from the goods.
Yeah, go for it. Whatever you think.
All right. How I started is I guess when I look at it, it's kind of been an evolution over time
Mm.
in my personal and professional experience with health and fitness. So growing up, I was a horseback rider. So I never really played sports. I never really ran, like never really was interested in fitness, and neither was anybody in my family. So when I went away to university, I decided to study kinesiology because I loved anatomy in high school. And I actually had the choice of going to a equine management program or kinesiology. So it was either horses or humans. And I decided on humans. And
Okay.
yeah, weirdly enough, the reason I picked my school, like looking back, I'm like, this was so not a good strategy, but it worked out. The reason I picked my school was because it looked like Hogwarts. So I ended up going into a really nice school for kinesiology, and there is kind of where I fell in love with fitness and I fell in love with nutrition. I became a personal trainer. I started working with sports teams at school. I started training for triathlons, going to the gym, and it was like for the first time, like I had done like little like magazine workouts in my bedroom before,
Yeah.
but it was like the first time ever I was like, oh my gosh, my body is changing. I feel better. Like I love the way I'm eating. And I was like, oh yeah, like I have it figured out. This is like, why isn't everybody doing this? It's
Yeah.
so easy. And then it was in 2011, I had a traumatic brain injury. So I actually ended up falling off of a horse and suffering a really bad concussion. And it was not treated well at all. So like just maybe at the time, the research behind concussions wasn't as robust as it is now. But I essentially did not treat my concussion well and went right back to sports, and then started really struggling with anxiety and panic attacks. And concurrently, like now looking back, I understand like what was going on. But then I started dealing with injuries, and I started gaining weight, and like kind of everything. It felt like everything was collapsing in on me. And no matter where I went, like doctors, or I saw psychologists, I saw neurologists, and no matter where I turned, everybody was kind of like, well, like on paper, you're fine. So like it's basically saying, implying that it was sort of in my head. So there was like this disconnect between, like, intuitively, I was like, I don't feel right. Like something is not right here. I don't feel like myself. But from the outside, everybody was telling me like, no, you're fine. Like everything is great.
And that's really
So
confusing for someone. I mean, if
yes.
you're in university, right? So were
Mhm.
you early 20s or
Yep. Like,
yeah,
yeah, early, I guess 23, 22 when
yeah.
this happened. Yeah.
And that's a really vulnerable time for a lot of people because that's when, you know, you leave school and you leave your friends and then you end up in this completely different environment. And suddenly, you know, you're dealing with this issue as well with your brain injury. And that must have been really confusing. I can imagine what that was like.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah. And unfortunately for me, my coping mechanisms were not the healthiest. So that also compounded it, because I just like didn't know how to process what was going on with my body and with my anxiety. So that also compounded because my nutrition went to the wayside. And my answer to everything was, well, eat less, exercise more,
Yep.
obviously. And
Yep.
then the more,
Totally.
exactly, like the more I did that, like the worse off I was. So like that continued for years. And it wasn't until I started my doctorate, I moved away, like basically uprooted my whole life. And I actually felt like the least amount of anxiety that I had in years when I left, like my previous life, I guess, like when I started to go back to school. And I started really diving into personal development. I started like scouring blogs and forums and just like trying to figure out like what there has to be more. Like there's a reason that all these symptoms are coming up for me, and there has to be an answer like to this. So yeah, I ended up taking pieces from like different things and like over time sort of figuring it out. And then when I was finished my doctorate and working as a physical therapist, I sort of started to realize this big disconnect that there was with health and the meaning of health for people, and where people were falling off the wagon, so to speak,
Mm.
when it came to their health. So I wanted it at first, like my mission was just to inform people. And like I realized there was so much misinformation out there So I wanted to just like inform people from a trustworthy source, like make it very realistic. And then it just ended up evolving into what it is now. Just trying to make fitness and health accessible for people. And I know that weight loss is something that I personally struggled with, and there's so many different reasons that women struggle with it. So I've sort of just like ended up branching more on to into that side of things, but I love it. And I still work as a physical therapist, which I love too.
Yeah.
So yeah, that brings us to today.
Yeah. Yeah. So it's almost like you had this experience of doing the usual advice, which is eat less, exercise more, which is basically what people, the trap that people are still falling into these days. And ignoring the kind of the emotional side of things. So it's almost like you've had this experience and suddenly you're like, I need to tell people that
Mm-hmm.
this is the way to do it. Like
Mm-hmm.
just ignore all the, the fads out there, and focus on yourself as a whole being, like focus on everything. Was there a specific time when you felt yourself think, okay, that's it, what I'm doing is not working with my diet and fitness, it's just not working, I need to change? Was there a pivotal moment in time when that happened, or was it more gradual, would you say? Like, was it kind of like an overnight thing, like you moved to do, you moved away, like you said, to do your doctorate? Was it then? Was it kind of like an overnight change, or did it happen slowly?
I think it was a little bit of both. And I
Mm.
think for me too, being very stubborn,
That
sometimes
helps.
yes,
That
it does.
helps.
And sometimes I knew at some level, sometimes I was like, okay, this is not working. So I need to change this. But also at the same time was like, yeah, but like, I don't really need to. It's not like that big of a deal yet. And
Yeah.
then concurrently, like some other big life changes sort of happened in there. And I feel like every time I went through something hard or something painful, when I came out on the other side of it and I was able to look back in and like how that changed my body, or like how that changed my nutrition or fitness, I sort of like learned a little bit about myself along the way
Mhm.
every single time. And then when things weren't going so well, I'd kind of like look back and be like, okay, so like what was working back then? What wasn't working? What was I doing differently? And then like adjust it as I went to. So like I never had like one major moment, but I definitely did get sick of my own crap.
Yes.
And
Yeah.
was
I
like,
hear
okay, like, yeah, like I'm holding myself back, like with all these excuses and
you. Yeah.
being like a victim in some situations, like, and you like hold yourself down, which in retrospect, like it's not, wasn't anybody's fault. It was just like how I had learned to cope at the time.
Yeah.
But yeah, there was a few times even looking back, it's like, what was I doing? Like, what was I thinking? It's
Yeah.
just like, in the moment, emotions take over, and yeah.
Yeah. Because I've been listening to, I'm the same as you. I listen to a lot of self-development speakers, and I'm very much into that side of things. And I'm always in a toss-up between knowing whether advising clients whether change can happen overnight, like you just need to change your mindset, and then you can be completely different the next day, and you can start eating well, exercising, and just being the person that you wanted to be, because your mindset can kind of change quite quickly on certain things. but
Mm-hmm.
then but then on the other side, things like this take time, it's more gradual. So I wonder if it's, you can have either, you can change quickly overnight, or whether it just takes a long time for everybody to make that change. I just wonder if that's something that you find with your clients. You find that they have changes quickly, or do they take some time?
I think it depends on the person.
Mm.
Usually, when it's a really quick, like overnight type of thing, I've found it's usually spurred by something scary or
Yeah.
something big happening in their life where they're like kind of snapped out of it. Like,
Mm-hmm.
okay, I need to make changes and I need to do this now. For other people, I think it's a practice, and for some things, and it depends on what it has been holding them back in the past.
Mhm.
Because like some of like this more psychological or mindset patterns and behaviors and habits that people have, if we don't really understand the root of it and we don't really understand or we can't really pinpoint like why things are happening, then it's harder to make changes and it's harder for people, I find, to care about the changes that they're making because they
Mhm.
don't really know, like understand why. So like for example, cravings, they come up a lot for people.
Yes.
And like for some people, yeah, it's as easy as, yeah, just don't have that anymore, like not even giving themselves the option.
Mm.
But for most people, like sugar, for example, or like sweets, it's unrealistic for people to go cold turkey and never have a sweet again. So
Yes.
in that situation, when someone's feeling out of control, we want to look at the root causes of that.
Yeah.
So sometimes it's stress.
Mm.
And like when they're triggered by stress, then that sweet treat becomes comfortable. So we need to learn different coping mechanisms first. Or sometimes it's just like a habit. Like my example of this is like growing up, we always had dessert after dinner
Yes.
and never really thought twice about it. Yeah.
I still
And
do
then,
that.
yeah, me too.
Yeah, good.
But like, it's like more intentional now because before I was just like, oh, I crave something sweet after dinner and like not really thinking twice about it.
Yeah.
And then, like, when you reflect, it's like, okay, the root of that now, I know it's a habit and that's how I grew up. So, like, of
Yeah.
course, that was imprinted on me. So, yeah, to answer your question, it can be quick for some people,
Yeah.
but most of the time it's a process to change.
Exactly. It depends on the personality type. Some people,
Yes.
you can give them a program and they say, right, and they do it. I mean, for example, my dad, he was a smoker, a very heavy smoker, way into his 30s. And
Hmm.
he went to a hypnotherapist one day and he just stopped cold turkey and he never turned back. So,
Wow.
and I have certain clients like that as well. You just give them something, they're like, right, they kind of, forget what they used to do. And they're like, right, I'm going to
Mm,
take your advice, and they do it. But then for the majority of people, like you said, it takes some time for them to kind of, make it a part of their life. And you said something really interesting just then. I had this question from one of my other clients not too long ago. And she said, what is the difference between um, emotionally wanting to eat something and, wanting to have a cake because you're emotionally eating, or choosing to have a cake because you have control and you're just like,
mm,
yep, I have intention now. I'm intending to have it because it's what I plan and it's kind of what I do. So what's the difference between the emotion and the intention, and how do you decipher between the two? Like, how do they know
mm.
which is which? Like, it can be so confusing for some
It
people.
can be. And you kind of already nailed it saying that, like the control aspect of it. Yeah, like the emotional eating tends to feel more out of control and it tends to leave people feeling guilty and ashamed. And it's sort of like frantic in a way. So, like, the whole picture is less like the whole picture feels less in control versus I call it, I got this from College Nutritionist on
Yeah.
Instagram. She calls it worth it versus not worth it indulgences. So
Right.
when it's a worth it indulgent, like you were saying, intentionally choosing the cake because it's a special occasion or it's really good cake or whatever reason, when you choose it and you're intentional about it and you're honoring your hunger and fullness cues, that feels more intentional. It feels more free and relaxing. It doesn't feel like you can just eat it and move on. It doesn't feel like it's something that you really need to perseverate over. And yeah, I think that for me anyway, that's how I interpret the difference between eating out of emotion versus eating out of enjoyment or choice. And then
Yeah.
the other side of that too is that we often associate emotional eating with negative, like stress eating or bored eating, but it can also be emotional in a positive way for people where they use food as part of a celebration every time. So sometimes for people, when food is so closely tied to emotion, not saying it's a bad thing inherently, but if it's someone that someone struggles with, we will sort of start to look at other ways of celebrating or expressing certain emotions other than food so that it's not the only way that they're expressing emotion.
So for example, what would you suggest? So if someone comes to you and says, every time I'm bored, I eat, every time I feel stressed, I eat, and they come to you with their triggers, what what would you advise them? What would you suggest to them?
Yeah. So if it's somebody who is really struggling to function through these issues, I will refer them to professional, like psychological support if they
Mm.
need it. If not, then usually we love lists in my community. We love a checklist. So my favorite thing, just because I find checklists are great because it takes the decision making out of the equation for people, which most of my clients are busy, they have families, they have jobs, like they're on the go all the time. So they don't always, you get overwhelmed when you're like, oh God, I gotta sit here and like think about what I'm gonna do now. So we love lists because it gives you like a quick reference. So for somebody who's struggling with bored eating or emotional eating,
Mm.
we'll sit down together and look at their lifestyle, look at what they enjoy, what fills their cup, and make a like a go-to list of things that they can do instead. So first of all, like we want to make sure that nutrition is nailed because sometimes cravings and that stuff can come up if your nutrition or stress is out of control. And then when we're working on that habit and reframing or rebuilding that habit, we'll look at some things like what's another option that you can think about or look at in those situations. And then what is that feeling that precedes that emotion? Is it that you just got home from work and you run inside and the kids are like wanting your attention and you got to make dinner? Like, is the answer then just to pause before you
Yeah.
go inside so you can regroup a little bit? Or if it's bored eating in front of the TV, for example, like if you're someone who sits down with a bag of chips and then next thing you know the bag is empty,
Yeah.
does it make more sense to be more intentional about it, pour the chips out into a bowl, or does it just make sense to forego that and maybe go for a walk instead and reframe a little bit again? Because yeah, the habit comes into play a lot there too for people where it just becomes a pattern.
Yeah. And do you recall what your go-tos were when you were recovering from your, the issues with food? What were your
Yeah,
go-tos?
still are. Journaling is a big one for me.
Same. Yeah. I've got it right
Walk.
here.
There you go. Oh my gosh, I don't have mine.
Have you got,
Oh,
oh damn,
yours is
we
so
could have shared.
cute. Aw,
I have it
love
next to me all
yours.
the time. Just take my notes whenever I have an idea. I'm like, yeah, I'll just put it
I
down.
love that. Love it. Oh, I'm so sad I don't have mine now.
I know that would have been a great moment, right?
I know. A little bonding moment. Yeah, journaling, walking is a really big one too. Like I used to be someone that, because I was a runner, I'd be like, oh, walking is for rest days. It's like not fun at all. But I kind of fell in love with walking. And
Yeah.
then even just something as simple as taking a breath and taking a moment like to turn inward has really made a difference for me. It's just remembering to do it sometimes is the hard
Yeah.
part.
Yeah.
But like eventually, like anything, the more you practice it, the more it becomes second nature. It's just that initial phase, like some people need some support with.
Yeah. And like you said, it wasn't like it was a black and white overnight thing. It's something that I'm sure that you integrated over time. Sometimes you would, give into the food, but then other times you would journal. And then before you know it, the healthy habits start taking over. And,
Mhm.
then you don't have to, you're not kind of worried about the food side of things anymore. It's
Yeah.
interesting. All of the habits you mentioned don't include food or drink, which is really good. For me personally, because I had the same kind of issue. So early 20s was my trigger as well.
Mm.
I was pretty much binge eating throughout my early 20s. And the way I came out of that was by my habit to go to when I was recovering was to find alternatives. So if I was to have, let's say, a chocolate bar, I would start to make those date energy balls, those chocolate energy
Oh
balls,
yeah.
and gluten-free, vegan, dairy-free cheesecakes. And so even though they were still packed with sugar and they were still not the best thing to eat if you were to have a lot of them, I found that it was a really great kind of bridge for me,
Hmm.
going from the, the foods that I'd binge on to then, just finding healthier alternatives. So for me, that was my habit. That was my go-to.
Mm.
So it's interesting how people have different ways of doing it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah. And that works for my clients too, is like that substitution. And that's, if you ever, my recommendation for people is reading Atomic Habits. Because have you read that book?
I have, yeah. It's brilliant.
It's just like full of so many good different ways of doing things.
Yeah.
But for me, like with the healthy eating, like the healthier alternatives, for me personally, with the trigger foods, that didn't work for me, because then I felt like mentally, subconsciously, I was giving myself permission to have more, because I was like, it's healthy for me. It doesn't like really matter.
See, that's
And then,
interesting how different we are and how different
so
people are.
interesting.
Like that just shows how different everyone is, and everyone has to have a different approach to this. Yeah, carry on.
Exactly. Oh yeah, no, that was all.
Okay.
Yeah.
So when a client comes into you, how do you start them off? So just say someone is overweight and they are struggling to lose it. What sort of track do you put them on, so that the listeners, if they have any of similar issues themselves, they can be like, okay, so these are steps I need to take to try and come out of this and try and lose some weight. So what would you advise to your clients usually when they come in?
Yeah, well, usually before we even get to working together, I screen my clients in a way, because my approach is very lifestyle based. And so most of the people who are attracted to my programs are looking for long-term and sustainable change. They're not looking for quick. So people that come into my world understand that, because I never want to get someone to a weight loss goal just for the sake of it, and then have them 2 months later back at square one because we didn't address anything.
Go to the root cause. Yeah.
Yes, 100%. So, and then to answer your question on like where to start, again, I'm going to say this so many times, it depends.
Yeah.
So physiotherapists are notorious for saying this, but it depends.
And so the physio community will be like, ha 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 ha, when you say like, that.
Ha, ha, it depends.
I get you.
Yes.
Everyone else is like,
yeah, they're like,
I don't get it.
Funny. But yeah, so we look at their root causes as to like why we're in this situation, and where have they gone wrong before, where do they feel like they go off the rails, so to speak, or like what's their main struggle, and we look at that first. So I make an assessment based on their entire lifestyle. I have like a whole intake form that people fill out, and I usually like am acquainted with my clients before we even get to working on a program together. And then we have I have do like a kickoff call kind of thing where we dive deep into everything, like nutrition, fitness, current lifestyle habits, sleep, hormones, what they're struggling with, what is challenging them currently. And we make a manageable game plan, and we adjust it every single week. So I have an app that I use that we can schedule habits into for people. We can schedule nutrition stuff in for people, and we can approach it whatever feels best for them, and whatever feels most manageable for them in whatever season of life they're in is where we start. So for some people, that's macro tracking, because they know that they don't have issues with emotional eating or binge eating, but for some reason, like something's not working for them. So we want to look at a more minuscule level and see like what's happening, and then work from there. Whereas other people are like, I'm at my wit's end right now. I am so frustrated. I feel so defeated. So we're going to start just by like, you're just going to have breakfast every day. Yeah. Or like, you're just going to try to hit 4,000 steps a day, because right now you're managing 2,000. Right. So we start really, really small, and then we build from there. It's like, I tell people, like, it's easy enough to build onto these habits. And if you want to be pushed, then we can push you. But if you feel like you get overwhelmed really easily and then you quit, or you're going to ghost me because this is too much and you're embarrassed, Like, no, let's start small and we can always add to it, but we want to make sure that you're nailing the basics first. And
Right.
then we can get into the nuances of supplements and macros and things like that.
Yeah. So you prefer to start people off slowly. So, and that first step depends on who the person is.
Yeah.
So you wouldn't necessarily go in and change their diet straight away when you work with them.
Not necessarily. I mean, so, for some people, I would have like, because I can have people tracking and inside my app, I can see what they're eating. So usually, like in the first couple of weeks, we're just tracking if they're not
Yeah.
already, so that we can see like where we're starting from.
Yeah.
Because if we don't know that, it's hard to be like, yeah, you're in a deficit or you're not, or like this is where you need to go next. Because if we have no idea where you're starting from, then we don't know where to go next
Right. So,
efficiently.
right. So starting with finding out the root cause of what their, why they tend to eat the way that they do, and then slowly making changes and taking it at their pace. And that's what you mean when you say no fad diets, no quick fixes. We're just going to take it slow and take it at your pace.
Yes.
So, what other factors are important then regarding a person? So they have their mindset, they have their nutrition. I know that you're into fitness as well. You're a real fitness lover, same as me. So, is it the same principles for you? If someone wants to lose weight and they're like, oh, I just want to lose weight, like what should I do? What exercise should I do? How would you approach that?
I am very big on education. So
Mm,
I think I kind of mentioned like when people don't understand why they're doing certain things, then it's less meaningful.
yeah.
So I try and educate my clients, and I have some workshops on the basics of weight loss so that they can look at where they think they're going wrong. So it is like the calories in, calories out, like you're saying, is the nutrition and movement,
Mm,
but then it's what's affecting the calories in and calories out that is throwing people off or like creating the picture that we see. So I assess it in my one-on-one clients, but I also teach people how to do this on their own in my workshops. So you look at things like stress, you look at things like your sleep habits, your hydration levels, hormonal issues, gut health issues, anything with your environment. Like for some people, they have a lot of younger children, so they have a lot of quick snacks very front and center in their kitchen. That's like a perfect example of environment, like just not being supportive to their goals. Or for some people, it's like their family and friends. So we look at those things, but the most, like I call it low hanging fruit. It's
yes.
like the most basic level is sleep, is movement. So easiest way to track that is through a step count for people. We look at their training, if they're doing anything strength training wise.
Mhm.
We look at nutrition, hydration, and then stress. So I guess those 6 would be the biggest ones. And then we can always get more minute from there.
So if someone was wanting to start their health journey tomorrow, what are some of the top tips that you have to get started on their journey?
Ooh, I have so
Ooh,
many.
let me get my list. Well, it depends, guys. It depends.
It depends. Wow. I love it. You'd be accepted with wide open arms in the physio
Oh, I feel
community.
so warm.
It depends. So I would start people, like if they want to start tomorrow, I start them by asking them why they want to start,
Right.
and really rooting down, um, like walking through, thinking about where you see yourself, why you're doing this at like a very deep level. So like it's one thing to say like I want to look better, but like why do you want to look better?
Yeah.
Is it because you want to show up differently for your family? Is it because you want to feel different around people at work or like in your job? So get really root down into like why you're doing this, or like longevity or quality of life, whatever. Really figure out why.
Yeah. And
Set.
just before you carry on, there's this really cool exercise that I came across where so you ask why you're doing it, and you ask yourself the same question, but why? But
Mm.
why? You ask yourself 7 times. Have you heard of
Oh my
it?
gosh, yes.
Yes. So so you ask yourself 7 times, and by the time you get to level 7, you should have a really deep meaning as to why. And I have to say, once you do find that why, doesn't it just put a rocket up your bum and you're just like, yes, I
Yes.
know why I'm doing everything. Like,
Yes.
don't you feel that?
And
Yeah.
uncovering that too is like so, it's something like to come back to, because
Yeah.
it's not going to be easy all the time. So like uncovering that, like you said, and like knowing it is just
Yeah.
like sometimes enough to like, get you through those hard parts.
Yes,
Yes.
exactly. And
What is
once
that
you hit
called?
it, it's
Yeah.
that it's I think
The
it's called
seven.
7 levels deep.
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay. I must have listened to the same podcast.
Yeah, I think so. I think we listen to the same people for sure.
I think
But
so.
it's a really, really powerful exercise.
It
And
is.
it's, for me, it's changed. It's changed my habits, and it's changed my motivation. So now I know why I'm doing the things that I do. It's
Mm-hmm.
so powerful, and it's totally worth it. So anybody who is listening and they want to lose weight, then ask yourself why, and do it 7 times
Mm-hmm.
approximately, because it changes, doesn't it, like from
Yes.
person to person. But and then don't stop until you get that why, the why that gives you goosebumps, and
Mm-hmm.
the why that kind of, maybe you cry, or maybe you hit a real soft spot.
Yeah.
So yeah, so that's a really good first step. So first of all, find their why. Okay,
Mm-hmm.
next, what else would you suggest? Top tips. Come on,
Next,
give me the
top
list.
tips, the list. And then look at, like we kind of started with, like you want to know where you're starting from in order to understand where you need to go. So I have people look at like what are you doing now? Like on average, like in an average week, how much are you moving? What are you eating? Where do you think you're going wrong? I think for the most part, people are very aware of themselves. They
Mm.
know what derails them and like what is where they need support for the most part. And if they don't, then I do recommend reaching out to a professional, because yeah, sometimes we have blind spots and we really
Yeah.
don't know. So
And because our habits are so ingrained that we don't even realize that we're doing things. And it's not until someone actually points it out and they say, well, how much do you walk in a week? And they're like,
mm-hmm,
oh, I'd never really thought about it. And then the moment they actually think about it, then they become conscious. And suddenly it's
mm-hmm,
like, oh, and then they can do something about it. So
yes,
you would say be conscious of those details in their
mm-hmm,
lifestyle. Yeah,
yep. Even if that means for some people, like I recommend tracking food for just 3, or logging food in some way for 3 days,
I agree.
even just to like to just for some awareness around, like you don't have to
Mm.
track it forever, but just look at like what you're eating, and you'll be surprised. Like a lot of people tell me, like once they start tracking, even just the act of writing it down, they're like, oh, like that made me think twice about eating that because I had to write it down. Like yeah.
Totally. It's so good. And again, the tracking, I find different personality types. So some people are just like, oh, I just can't do it. Like they're just
Mm-hmm,
not that way inclined. But then some people absolutely love it. But I
mm-hmm,
say the same. If you just do it for a certain number of days, you don't have to do it forever, because
mm-hmm.
after that you can eyeball it, right? So you can
Yep.
just look at your food and be like, oh yeah, that's approximately, I know what that is approximately. So you just need to do it for a handful of days. I usually say 7 days, just so you get
Mm-hmm.
the weekdays and you get the weekend as well.
Yep.
And after that, just eyeball it. But it's such valuable information, even though accuracy, I mean, you can't count on the accuracy of those apps, but
Yeah.
it's really great to just give you an idea, and make you conscious of what you're doing, make you
Mm-hmm.
aware of what you're
Mm-hmm.
doing. That's really powerful.
100%. And like up to add on to that, what you're saying, I think too, like for people, depending on their goals, like if their goal is fat loss, or if their goal is just health, or if their goal is healing, then that's going to require different approaches. And for my clients anyway, like when someone is looking for weight loss or fat loss, that's not how they're going to eat forever. So that's something also that I try to educate my clients on, is that if they do feel resistance, like that much resistance around tracking, then there's other ways, like you said, like portions, like hand portions, or eyeballing it, or being more, I guess, mindful in a way of food. But I also make sure they understand that that's not what they're going to do forever. It's just a tool for now so that we can be
Exactly.
efficient.
People
And
get
then
scared, right? They're
100%.
just like,
Yeah.
oh, I don't want to be that person. And it's like, you
Yeah.
don't have to be, like, it's
Yeah.
just to let you know what's going on. It gives you the
Yes.
picture. And then,
Exactly.
then you know what to do after that. Yeah.
And there's so much misinformation out there too, with like the whole everything weight loss. It's a multi-billion-dollar industry, and
Yeah.
everyone's trying to sell you something. So people absorb different things that they see,
Yeah.
and I think that's something that people struggle with too. Like I hear so many women like, oh, I know I should be low carb, but I just like can't do it. And like, but who said you have to be low carb? Like you don't have to be low carb. Like
Yeah.
it's so it just, yeah, it depends on the person. Awareness is number one, and then you can build or adjust from there. Yes.
Right. Okay.
Then next.
Yeah. Yes. And are there any specific foods or any supplements, or is there, I know you said that you don't recommend supplements going like in the beginning, but is there anything, like, what would you recommend someone eats in general, just if someone was like, oh, I want to lose some weight, so how should I do this? Is there anything specific, like your go-to kind of food plan that you would usually give, or is it again totally unique from person to person?
It depends on how specific you want to be.
Right.
So yeah, I think like in general, what
Mhm.
I would tell somebody if they're like, I really have no clue, some of the more general ways to just like naturally put yourself in a calorie deficit or help you like lose weight or manage weight is incorporating more whole foods. So by whole foods, I mean fruits, vegetables, legumes, meats, dairy, like something not packaged. And by no means does that mean like never have processed foods, because like we all know fitness
Yeah.
and health and nutrition is not dichotomous like that. So I make sure people understand that no food is off limits, but we want to start shifting the proportions of what you're eating and like how much you're eating of certain things. So more whole foods is the easiest way. Like think of eating the rainbow and like just incorporating more color into your palate. And then number two, for somebody who's looking for a weight loss goal, is to incorporate more protein. So that's something I see a lot in newer clients, is when we look at their nutrition habits, they're generally not having enough protein. And
Totally.
yeah, and the reason, I'm sure, but
Mm.
if anybody's listening doesn't know, the reason that's important during a weight loss phase or weight loss season is because it helps to preserve muscle mass, which and also helps you stay more satisfied, so you're not hangry, you're a little nicer.
Yeah. Yeah.
And then it also helps prevent that yo-yo diet or that rebound that happens when people go really too low calorie for a really long time. Their body will end up metabolizing some muscle, and your muscle is what makes up your resting metabolism. So that's how many calories you're burning just to exist throughout the day. If you have less muscle on you, then you're burning less throughout the day just to exist. So after a extreme weight loss phase or a phase where you are losing muscle mass for whatever reason, once you come out of that, you start to eat more or less normally or at maintenance, and you haven't preserved your muscle mass, then you will find that you will need less food to maintain. So we try to prevent that from happening by eating enough protein. And I just tell people like one serving per meal is a good thing to aim for. By meals, I mean breakfast, lunch, dinner.
Yeah.
And then that is another tip for somebody who is looking to lose weight, is to try to have 3 square meals a day, and then
Right.
maybe one snack depending on how hungry you are.
Okay. So you definitely have some core principles there. And I'm also a big fan of emphasizing how important protein is as well. So for anyone listening who doesn't know how much protein they're having in a day, that's when the food tracking will really come in handy, because you might actually be shocked as to how much protein you should be having. I mean, how much protein should they be having? What's their target?
So the body can absorb up to 30 grams at a time.
Yeah.
So I recommend to my clients 20 to 30 grams per meal if possible. And then to figure out how much you need in a day,
Mm.
we usually look at, because I'm in Canada, we're going to go by pounds,
Yeah, go.
is zero
I'm
point
kind of in the
0.6.
middle of everything, so you can
Yeah.
say whatever. I have
Yes. Okay.
listeners from
Maybe.
different places.
Okay, maybe you can help with the conversion to kilograms, but we usually say between zero point 0.6 and zero point 0.8 grams of protein per pound of like goal body weight or current body weight, depending on the size of your body.
Right, right. Um, so that also ties in nicely with exercise. So we'll discuss exercise a little bit because I'm aware that, the time is running by. But so when it comes to exercise, what sort of exercise programs do you like to put people on? Do you have any specific programs, or do you think people should walk, or they should do cardio, or do you like them to do weights? What's your preference?
I think a mix of everything, but at a base level, I have people doing whatever exercise they enjoy the most. So if there's someone who really struggles with consistency, then we just start with, what do you like doing? If
Mm,
that's walking, let's start walking. If that's Zumba, let's do Zumba. Like
yeah.
whatever you enjoy is what we're going to start with. And then optimally, I like to see people strength training 2 to 3 times a week with progressive programs. So really trying to get stronger in the gym and really focusing on form and time under tension and intensity in those 2 or 3 sessions. And then from there, I think steps and walking is a really easy way to just incorporate some movement for health. And that's an easy way for most people to get some movement in without an extra time commitment.
Yeah.
And then if someone has time for more, then we look at cardio potentially, but I'm not like big on it. It's
Yeah.
more preference wise for people.
Yeah, because I find cardio is the trap that people fall into. They think, oh, I need to run, or I need to jump on the cross trainer and do an hour. And that's something that I want to shout from the rooftops. Like, you don't
Yes.
have to, that is the worst way to spend your time
Oh
in
my
the gym.
gosh,
Like,
yes.
unless of course you enjoy it, or you're training for something in particular. So let's say you're training for an Ironman or a marathon or something, then of course you need to put in the hours. But if you just want to lose weight, it's just, there are better things to be doing in the gym for
Mm-hmm.
sure.
Yes.
And I'm actually, like you said, you've mentioned walking a couple of times, and I am a big fan of walking. And like you, I used to think, it's a waste of time. It doesn't do anything. But actually, it's such a powerful fat burner. It's the best way to get outside, get your metabolism going, and to actually not wear yourself out as well. It's a fabulous form of
Mm-hmm.
exercise. And the 10,000 steps a day, that's definitely something to work towards for sure for each person. So if they wanted to start off slowly, then, working on the walking is a really nice way to start.
Mm-hmm.
And some people have had some really amazing benefits from that, just huge amounts of weight loss just by like increasing their walking time. So
Mm-hmm.
it's such a powerful form of exercise for sure.
100%. I
Yeah.
was going to say that I would be right behind you shouting on the rooftops about cardio. I just want to say that. I'd be right behind you.
All right. I was a victim again, early 20s, when I made all of the mistakes, dieting, lots and lots of cardio. And I was also doing weights at the time, and I was getting quite big. And I thought, oh, it's because I'm doing the weights. But really, it was because I was doing so much cardio, and I was binging so much because I was
Mm-hmm.
getting so hungry. And I was like, oh gosh, it's because of the weights. I'm getting bigger. But really, it wasn't that. It was just the other stuff that I was doing. I was running an hour a day, and it was just absolutely exhausting. Like
Wow.
an hour a day.
That's a
Yeah.
lot.
Yes, that I
Wow.
told you. Like I told you. That's why I want to shout it from the rooftops. You don't have to
Mm,
do massive amounts of cardio to get the
no,
results. Yeah.
exactly.
So, do you
Yeah.
have any other tips? Anything else that you want to say to the listeners that you think they'll benefit from, just to finish?
I can tell you Actually, I want to share like where I see women struggling a lot with the
Yes, please
hormonal
do.
stuff. Yes.
Yeah.
I think first is women struggle putting themselves first and
Mm.
they feel selfish. I hear that many times. If people feel selfish or they feel guilty for spending time away from their family or kids or work or whatever, just to pour a little bit into themselves. And there's that cliche, you can't pour from an empty cup.
Yeah.
I love that. It's a
Yes.
cliche for a reason because it's true. And then the other thing is the way that I think about it, and I'll share that and pour it into you and all your listeners, is that I was in that same boat where I felt like if I spend more time thinking about myself, then that's selfish because it's taking time away from other people. So I was constantly putting other people ahead of myself and ahead of my needs. So when I was really struggling, I was realizing that I didn't even know who I was because I just was becoming whoever I was with needed me to be. So I sort of reframed it for myself, and now this is how I think about it: is that I can't possibly be my best version of myself for other people if 100% of me isn't present. So if I'm showing up at 50% because I'm just so depleted because I haven't poured into myself, then I'm not really being the best partner. I'm not really being the best friend or daughter or whatever. So why not take that little 10%, 5% of my day, pour into myself so that I can show up at 80, 90, 100% for all the people that matter so much to me. And it's made a world of difference because I'm not as resentful about spending time with people because I'm like, I've taken care of myself. Now I can pour into other people from that like very whole, empowered and grounded place versus like feeling resentful that I'm showing up for others and like I'm still like over here and not taking care of myself. So I would just like to pour that into women who are listening who maybe
Yeah.
feel guilty about it.
And that's a really good tip because I think a lot of women are struggling with that. That's a really common thing. And it's like that saying, if the plane is going down, you put the gas mask on yourself first
Yep.
before you can
Yep.
help anyone else. Because if you're not doing well yourself, you're not doing well for anybody else. Your best bet is to be your best self, show up for yourself, and then other people will also get the best of you as well. And that way everybody wins. So
Yes.
I completely agree with you.
100,000%. Mic drop.
Yeah. I think that's a strong finish.
I like that.
Well, Eni, thank you so much for coming on to this podcast and for being my first guest. I
So
really
exciting.
appreciate it, and I couldn't think of a better person to do it, to be honest. So
Thank you
thank you
so
so
much.
much. I'm really grateful. And yes, I know that we'll be in touch fairly soon. So thank you
Yes.
very much.
Thank you for the opportunity. It was really nice chatting with you.